Ukraine says it has hit a Russian Kilo-class submarine with underwater drones in the Black Sea port of Novorossiysk.
At 2:23 hours deep into the Black Sea, three Ukrainian FP-1 naval drones slipped into Russian-monitored waters at nearly 180 kilometers per hour. Their engines hummed just above the waves. Their wooden frames skimmed 3 meters above the surface. Their destination? A Russian intelligence ship that had spent weeks listening, decoding, and mapping every Ukrainian drone movement on the coastline. The ship sat 15 miles off Novorossiysk, gathering electronic data day and night. Its R-381T surveillance arrays could track a drone launch seconds after takeoff. For over a month, it had been building a pattern, one that would soon let Russia predict Ukrainian naval strikes before they even began. But that night, everything changed. The Ukrainian drones were already moving through an area the Russians believed was quiet. To Russian operators, it was just another routine patrol window. But the wooden FP-1 drones were doing something their systems weren't built for, staying almost invisible. Their plywood bodies had a radar signature smaller than a bird, and their engines ran too cool for easy thermal detection. For the first 20 minutes, no Russian sensor detected anything at all. Then a 4-post R reconnaissance drone entered the sector, flying its usual racetrack pattern. Its powerful thermal camera could spot tiny temperature changes from several kilometers away. Almost immediately, the 4-post crew noticed a faint spike, 3 small heat signatures skimming low over the water. They zoomed in and briefly saw the shapes, but before the system could classify them, the FP-1s dropped from 3 meters to 2, disappearing into the chaotic thermal clutter created by the waves. The contacts dissolved. The operator marked them as possible birds and continued the patrol, unaware their first surveillance layer had already failed. Meanwhile, the mission's urgency became clear. Just minutes after the FP-1s launched, Russian Shahed drones struck the Ukrainian launch site. Explosions tore through the area and destroyed equipment as operators fled. But the attack came too late. The drones were already far out over the water, beyond reach, and the Russian spy ship still had no idea what was heading toward it. At 3:30 hours, while the 3 FP-1 drones moved deeper into the Black Sea, Ukraine launched a second wave of naval drones, 20 in total toward Sevastopol. But these weren't strike drones, they were decoys. Each one cost under $10,000, built from modified jet skis and old fishing boats, and programmed to imitate the electronic signature of Ukraine's real attack drones. Their job was to look threatening, move like a coordinated strike group, and force a Russian reaction. The decoys accelerated, slowed, and spread out in patterns that mimicked a large offensive. They transmitted the same encrypted signals Russia monitored, and some even carried artificial heat sources to appear like engines on thermal cameras. On Russian radar, it looked like the biggest naval drone assault Dr. 1 since 2022. Russian doctrine required an immediate response, so the commander at Novorossiysk scrambled 6 Ka-27PL helicopters, and another 4 took off from Sevastopol. 10 helicopters rushed at full speed, chasing what they believed was a real attack. While they moved in the wrong direction, the actual FP-1 drones flying east toward the Russian spy ship continued undetected. The trap worked exactly as planned. The 3 FP-1 drones shifted their course 15 degrees north, aiming for a narrow radar gap Ukrainian analysts had identified weeks earlier. 2 Russian Podlet K-1 radars in the area rotated at exactly 10 revolutions per minute, creating a small 4-second window each minute where their beams both pointed away from the same slice of sky. It was like 2 searchlights turning in sync, and the drones had to pass through the blind corridor at the perfect moment. But Russia had changed its tactics. The radars now used random desynchronization, shrinking the safe corridor and making timing far more difficult. The first drone entered the zone at 4:47 hours, disappearing, reappearing for 2 seconds, then vanishing again. A radar operator saw a brief flicker, but dismissed it before he could identify it. The second drone slipped through 30 seconds later, still hidden, still on course. The third drone, however, drifted almost 200 meters off track due to a slight gyroscope fault. As it corrected, the radar beam swept across it and picked it up as a fast, low-altitude contact. Normally, this would trigger an alert, but operators were overwhelmed watching the massive decoy swarm heading towards Sevastopol. One small anomaly wasn't enough to pull their attention. The operator labeled it a bird and moved on. The drone survived the crossing, but the correction burned precious fuel, leaving it less than a minute to reach the target. And at 600 hours, the lead FP-1 drone was still 240 kilometers from the Russian spy ship when its GPS position suddenly began sliding east. It wasn't a small shift. It was a sharp, steady drift, even though the drone itself was flying in a straight line. This meant only one thing: Russian GPS spoofing. From Crimea, the R330ZH GTEL system had turned on, blasting out fake GPS signals at 100 watts versus the real satellites at 0.00001 watts, which is far stronger than the real ones, and slowly pulling the drone toward a waiting Panzer air defense battery. But the Ukrainians had planned ahead. Old oil platforms sat across the Black Sea every 50 kilometers, and the FP-1s were trained to recognize them. When the drone's camera spotted the next platform, it used the shape to reset its real position and ignored the fake GPS signals completely. With one quick correction, the first drone was back on the right path. The second drone wasn't so lucky. At 6:15, a cheap capacitor inside its GPS module overheated and killed the receiver. With no guidance at all, the drone drifted in the wrong direction, slowly dropping lower over the waves. After half an hour, it touched the water and disappeared quietly under the surface, and only 2 drones were left moving toward the target. At 7:23 hours, the Russian spy ship activated its Mineral M radar, scanning the waves for threats. It picked up a faint harmonic signal, the tiny ghost frequency from the FP-1's cheap motor. The reading showed a bearing of 285, moving at 180 kilometers per hour, only 15 meters above the water. The ship knew something was out there, but wooden drones gave unstable reflections, and the radar kept losing lock. The operator labeled it intermittent, yet it was enough to send a Project 03160 Raptor patrol boat racing toward the contact at 35 knots. The fog had cut visibility down to 500 meters, and with all helicopters drawn away by the decoys, the ship was effectively blind, and none of them realized a second drone was closing in from another direction. At 7:30, the first FP-1 reached the target area. The spy ship was right where expected, with patrol boats forming a tight radar screen around it. Then nature changed everything. A strong temperature inversion bent the radar beams upward, lifting their coverage above low-level objects. Anything flying under 30 meters became invisible, and the FP-1 cruising at 3 meters simply slipped beneath it. A patrol boat finally spotted the drone visually at 500 meters and opened fire. Rounds tore through the wooden frame, and one bullet clipped the propeller, causing violent shaking. Still, the drone kept flying with only 90 seconds of fuel left. At 800 meters from the spy ship, the cracked engine mount gave out, and at 7:34, the motor seized, sending the drone gliding downward. But its mission was complete. Every Russian gun was pointed at it, not at the actual threat approaching from the northwest. Shortly after, the third FP-1 emerged from the mist, flying merely 10 meters above the water in which the lookout detected it at 300 meters. But it was already too late. The drone focused its camera on the bottom of the ship's mast, where the Mineral M radar, signal receivers, and R381T surveillance antennas were located. At 7:35, it crashed into the mast at maximum velocity. The blast tore through the tower, fusing antennas, wrecking processors, and causing a series of subsequent explosions. In moments, the ship's complete intelligence system, weeks of gathered data and tracking trends, was transformed into contorted metal. The ship stayed afloat, but it was permanently blinded. For the first time in 6 weeks, Ukrainian naval drones were invisible again. This strike showed how a handful of low-cost wooden drones could defeat a ship built to track entire coastlines. It showed how deception, timing, and terrain could overpower expensive radars and helicopters. And it reminded Russian forces that even the quietest night on the Black Sea could end with a single drone slipping through the fog. And as this war evolves, the line between vulnerability and invisibility is becoming thinner than ever. Do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more videos like this.